Hello, and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. As a reminder, the thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, you can always catch on Facebook or YouTube. Love seeing you over there. If you chat with us live, your chat may even show up in the show. So that's pretty cool. As always, if you can't catch us live, you can always catch us later on your favorite podcast app. You know me, my name is John Ruark. I'm a past master of the Patriot Lodge, number 1957, in Fairfax, Virginia. Next up for his introduction is Robert Johnson. Hey, Robert.
Howdy, howdy. Robert Johnson here, past master Waukegan 78, current sitting secretary over at Space Novum Lodge, 1183 in Libertyville, Illinois, and the host of the Whence Came You Masonic podcast. And if you understand my lower third, then cheers to you.
50K of bananas. 50K pounds of bananas. It's a lot of bananas.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get the reference, but yeah, I'm slow tonight.
It's a deep cut. You probably won't get it without.
I'll get it at like 2 a.m. or something. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know some of the other go up a little bit later, but we'll get rolling in tonight's episode. So before we do, definitely always shout out to the patrons who support the show. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much. And as always, if you want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/Masonic Roundtable and do some background group, all sorts of good things. So we'll see you over there. Awesome. Terrible missed last week. So good comment about to work on and is my internet going in and out? What's going on with that? Just a hair. All right, we'll see what we can do about that. While I'm going to get up my trusty tarot deck. This one is what do we got? The Bones Arcana. This is right off of Etsy. And so we have the two best things in Masonry, the tarot and skulls. So we have a skeleton-themed deck here. So let me pull this week's card in no particular order. And here we go. Let me switch cameras to zoom in. We have, boom, the Page of Cups. Look at that.
Ooh. Yeah, so we got some feminine energy with the cup suit. Page, a trump card, but low on the totem pole.
Got emotions. We got like new emotions, new love, new endeavors. Right?
It's like a beginning
kind of the full...
into. It's like the dipping of the toes into some sort of divine feminine wisdoms.
Your spiritual quest, maybe something like that.
Yeah. Or maybe it's time to try for a new baby.
To the topic. Maybe not. Not here.
No, not for you.
All right. So, yeah, hopefully you can see some parallels to that, to this week's topic. All right. So, this week's topic is specifically on the allegory of the cave. It relates to Plato. So, while I go check some technical stuff, Robert, why don't you go ahead and give a brief overview of allegory of the cave?
Sure thing. So we have a brief overview of the allegory of the cave, which if for anybody who's never seen this, let me pull up an image for you. Let's see here. We'll use maybe this guy, and I will present. the screen. No, I won't. Okay, so imagine a cave. Inside the cave, there are people. They are chained inside the cave, and they are facing a wall. And behind them is the way out of the cave. And these people, their entire lives, are staring at a cave wall. And the shadows that are cast on the wall from the outside world. The outside world, of course, the sun is shining, people are walking by, people are transacting business or doing whatever. And those things look mighty strange to the folks who are actually in the cave. They have seen something different than perhaps what is actually happening. And so the allegory of the cave is Plato has uh, essentially said that there is the ability for the philosopher to step outside the cave to view what we might term objective reality, the truth. If you've ever seen, let's say, the Flammarion engraving, the guy who's looking beyond right the circle of earth to see how the machines in the heavens work. In this sort of way, it can be somewhat related. But I think what's really important about the allegory of the cave is it speaks to the humans' quest for knowing more, and also at the same time a sort of apathy about wanting to search for more, a settling, if you will, for what is easy to understand. And then even a third part, which we sure will get into, which is necessarily the return. Let's say you're the person who's chained up inside the cave and you escape and you witness the world and you want to come back to rescue your friends from ignorance. And yet there is violence imposed
Yes.
upon you as a bringer of what we might call objective truth.
Yeah, there you go. So that's a good overview. So we find this this allegory in Plato's Republic, and if you remember your SPAA, you had the lineage of teachers of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and then Alexander the Great. So we're now at the P of SPA, where Plato is now using this the characters of his brother Glaucon and his old mentor Socrates, and telling this story of this back and forth between this mentor Socrates and Glaucon. And it alludes to some of the other allegories that are made throughout the Republic, but again, if you read it on its own, it still stands alone. And basically, the premise is, and I don't know if you can even try to get a different graphic up, or if your screen share is going to work, but the premise is that you have imagine, if you will, that there was a cave that reaches, has a hole that reaches up towards the sky, but otherwise it's a dark cave, and people have been born and grown up inside of this cave facing the back wall, right? Not towards the light, but this back wall deep into the cave. And all they know, they've been chained up where they're facing the wall, they can't turn around, and their whole life they've just been facing this wall. And lo and behold, someone behind them is projecting shadows, silhouettes, um, just through a fire, and then they hold up little puppets, that silhouette onto the wall. And they say this is a horse, and they see a horse go by. It's really just a shadow of the horse. They might see, a person walk by, but it's really a shadow of a person, not even a real person. Remember, it's a puppet. But over time, because this is all you're facing this wall, you associate that thing with that form, that shape. Okay, so your whole life you've learned that these forms on the wall are those things. And then he posits, well, what happens if one of those people break free from their chains and turn around and look behind them? Well, first, they're going to see the light from the fire. It's going to blind their eyes. They're going to be like overwhelmed with their senses. And after they adjust with that, shocking jarring change in their attitude, they're going to say, wait a minute, that's just a puppet of a horse that's been walking along. That's just a puppet of a person. And so it's going to hurt their head. I mean, if it's all you've known is this one thing, and then you find out it's all been fake, it's all been false, then there has to be some sort of internal transformation that has to go with that, right? It's going to hurt to say, wait a minute, my whole understanding of life has now been turned upside down.
And we see this, like, I think for a lot of us, we see it when in movies or things like this. The idea of Plato's cave is kind of contemporary like renditions exist in films, let's say,
Right.
when the small town kid goes to the big city and then he comes back home. Oh, you're just a big city boy now, right? Like this whole idea, right? And this is kind of the animosity that can happen, and I think for folks maybe in the real world, I'm sure we've got listeners out there, people who watching this show, who went to their first year of an associate's program or any higher learning outside of high school, right?
Right.
Where the classic thing that I think people love to rip on are like first year college or college students, grad students. They take their first philosophy 101 class, or my favorite is the first political science class, and then they come home at Thanksgiving break, and all of a sudden, we have our brothers. I hear about it all the time in Lodge. I'm just so scared. My son's going to come home and he's going to do nonstop talking about politics. He's going to be the expert. Blah 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 blah. He don't know nothing. And right, but this kid actually has now formed likely a much more objective sense of what the true reality behind some sort of thing up for discussion could be than his parents maybe ever did, right? Unless your father or
Right.
somebody is like, like an accredited, professor of some sort. But this is like a real world example of the cave, is when we kind of go out and we try to come back,
Right.
and it's really not always met with the best of, well, sometimes people just get mad.
Yeah. Exactly. Because we haven't even because you talked about then exiting the cave, right? So it does take a certain kind of individual that would then keep going, right? And once their mind's been blown, then they see the exit to the cave. They see that they can actually climb out of the cave and see what a real horse looks like, what a real person looks like, what the sun looks like. And that just, again, opens their aperture, both literally and figuratively, to what they've experienced in life.
And I think something that is really interesting about this is when that anger comes back. You had said this is like it hurts your brain and things, right? So you escape. And in Plato's allegory, he talks about, the blinding light of the day outside of the cave. And then actually, there is actually a new blindness that forms for we'll call them the illuminated individual. So the illuminated individual, you who has stepped outside the cave and you want to come back. Well, no longer, right? Can you even see in the dark? You're no longer like what I'm losing the creature, right? We had the Eloi who lived above ground, and then oh geez, the Time Machine, H.G. Wells. Anyway,
Oh man, yeah.
so then you have the folks who live on the underground, and the problem is now you can't see what they see anymore.
You're physically changed, right?
You have physically and mentally and psychologically evolved outside, fully outside of anything that can be now witnessed or viewed or anything by whoever you were with in your cave, your friends, your colleagues, your peers, without them having to had that experience that you've had. Now you're the blind one again. They're upset with you and they think you're an idiot or whatever the case is. And actually it meets with violence. And
Yeah,
in Plato's cave, right, he talks about
I think
this.
that's fascinating, actually.
this kind of terrible thing that happens, which is the attack on anything that comes into the cave once something has come in to threaten.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, that's all they know. They've not had that transformation. And you come back and you're like, hey guys, this is
Morlocks.
amazing. You should really check this out. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not, that is not it at all. And don't try to change my point of view, which sounds familiar, right? When you have a lot of the discourse we have where may have an opposing viewpoint and someone's like, I don't believe it. Stay away from me. You're wrong. I'm not gonna listen. That it really it is met with violent resistance when you try to come back and like free someone else.
It's a beautiful analogy, right? I mean, it has its flaws, right? It is absolutely, without question, oversimplified. But it gets the point home that
Right.
there's more for us. That there absolutely is more out there. And it's hard to really talk about, I think, the allegory of the cave without thinking about these ideas of things that we've talked about a lot of on this show, dealing with perspectives, because that is primarily kind of one of the modicums that we learn about and from other people, and we grow as people by learning through these perspectives that others give us, which are of course subjective experiences. And right, so the subjective in the cave, how do we justify or what have you, the objective, what could be outside the cave? And I think this is something that we should really define. And the statement is that objective reality is true because it's based on facts, not opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And further, we'll say it's an accepted truth that exists. This is the key part, that exists independently of any individual belief or opinion.
Right.
So it's an impartial view of the world that isn't influenced by a personal feeling, belief, or desire.
Or to paraphrase, facts don't care about your feelings, right?
That's right. But perhaps we have an issue with this today, right? Like,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
In a practical sense, Freemasonry in America right now, I think around the world, there are multiple, what I might call propaganda machines working against facts. You see people all the time talking about don't trust the media. And there have been some really interesting shifts or even remodelings of Plato's cave. If I can find it, I will share it, but it's basically the modern Plato's cave. And there's
I think I've seen that graphic. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to dig that up.
All right. I'll find that.
So while you're looking at that, another thing too is like, okay, let's bring this back to Freemasonry, right? So why are we talking about the allegory of the cave on a Masonic podcast? And many brothers have written papers that align some of the concepts, right? Specifically, like the most obvious one is in Freemasonry, we are brought from darkness to light, right? That is a clear metaphor and allegory that we use as part of the craft to transform someone from during the ritual. They are going from physical and metaphorical darkness into light. So they're going to come out on the other side with a different perspective. They're going to have things shown to them that they had not seen before, the esoteric parts of the craft. And so hopefully they will not reject that. They will not fight it. They'll not be blinded and dazzled by it. You might take a little while to get your eyes adjusted if you're ever brought to light. But the fact of the matter is that hopefully you will leave that lodge meeting, you will leave that degree with a different perspective than when you came in. That should be the intent and purpose of the initiatic experience. Right?
Absolutely agree. I think that, we actually had somebody, Brother Kenneth Beeler, check this out. He said he was going to do a paper on the hoodwink, and our brother told him he should put the allegory of the cave into it. Cannot disagree with this.
Bingo. Right.
I think this is a prime example of how you can essentially take a core concept in what we might call "What up, it's Joe," in objective sort of philosophy, and bring it into Freemasonry, which it is almost. We talk about being illuminated and like being
Right.
raised to the sublime degree of a
Hmm.
master mason, and in essentially it's almost like, you know, the allegory of the cave has, of course, the leaving, but it has the return as well, which deals with some things that ultimately could translate, like that violence of the return could translate into what even happens in the third degree.
Yes. Yes, I know I'm late. And I was actually, so spoiler alert, I was watching. Facebook now does really good closed captions. So I was actually watching you guys with the closed captions on. So
I saw the comments. I was like, wait a minute.
I
How
was
is
trying to
he?
keep up. I was trying to keep up. I'm the secretary, so I have nothing important to do. But I'm so glad you guys didn't touch on the return to the cave part yet, because that is, I think, one of the most important parts of the
Joe's
entire
jam.
allegory, right? Oh, that's my job?
That's your jam.
Oh, it is my jam, the return, right? And I think, Robert, I think I saw you, the closed captioning said that you were talking about how you're blinded again by, once you see the sun, first you see past the fire and then you see past the sun and you're blinded by the sun, right? And it takes time. But I think the most important part of the allegory, and you guys have touched on it so wonderfully tonight. I'm really bummed I was late. The return. And everything that Plato puts in there is done for a very specific reason, right? Like nothing is just arbitrary, right? So when he talks about when Socrates is talking about the story of the cave and he returns, he's blind again, right? He's blind because his eyes cannot, perceive the darkness anymore because he's seen, the real forms. Did you guys talk about forms?
Not yet. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So, but yeah, so he's blinded again. So when he goes and talks to the people that are still chained behind the alcove there in the cave, and all they see are the shapes, he's not coming from a position of power, right? Like, hey, I see all this stuff and this is cool. He's kind of bewildered and he's blind and he can't see anything and he stumbles and falls. And so he doesn't have a lot of credibility going into the cave to talk to his former peers,
Yeah, and I think that's and again, even trying to translate that, trying to describe this abstraction, right? Where it's kind of described, if you want to think of it as an abstraction from the material to the intellectual or the enlightened or the super abstract. Again, if you try to come back in and say, hey, that's not really a horse, that's a shadow, and everyone's gonna be like, what's a shadow? What I mean? What do you mean? I have no concept of this because I only see the material, I only see the physical. I don't see this broader concept of mathematics and forms and ideas.
This was an interesting one, Brother Eric Schultz pointed out, right? The challenge of knowing whether we truly left the cave or just entered another one with different puppets.
Cave part 2.
This is really a wonderful segue into thinking about what this kind of enlightenment can cause in terms of the people who have not yet gone through this sort of awakening or what have you, right? This is the idea that of course there's the anger that they could have with you and all of these things, but thinking about the we want to call like affluence, a form of like, is educating yourself a form of elitism? Is coming back down to grab your brothers and bring them out even a good thing? And then further, there's this whole idea of the modern concept of Plato's cave, which is essentially what anybody who is online watching us right now is doing, except the light is in front of you. We're just making sure you see what we want you to see, right? And this can be true with any set of narratives that exists out there because of everybody's ability to, throw puppets on the wall now. So we have a greater responsibility now to try to be objectively true, I think. But then there's the arguments of those folks who are still consuming. Right now, we don't really know in the modern Plato's cave what is true when we're looking at the same light. You know what I'm saying? It's like you what who's casting the puppets? I don't like Fox's puppets. I like CNN's puppets or NPR's puppet. Like there's all these kind of things, or I like the lightest
Different
tool.
shadows. Mhm.
Yeah, right. And so through various things, whether that be or religious organizations, our systems of higher learning, or YouTube channels, right? Like
you touch on something really amazing in that you were, when you first started talking about the guy coming back into the cave, you kind of get the sense that when this person is returning, the enlightened or the illumined person, he's returning and he's starting to explain to his former homies what the real world is like and what real forms are like. You kind of get the sense that he's talking to people that are in doubt or in denial, or they're just apathetic to this. It's like, you don't know what you're talking about, man. A horse is that black thing with the squiggly things, and that's what he is. And but if you really read this story closely, you start to see that these people are responding from, and this is where it started to pop into my brain when you started talking about the political part, they're all coming at him from a place of fear, right? They are scared crapless of what he's talking. They're like, no way, you're shattering my world. Like, the world is not what you're saying, and everything that I know is now you're attacking it, right? And so it's definitely, and like I said, when you started talking about news channels, I'm like, a lot of people, when they're faced with things that attack their preconceived notions, which is what those people in the cave are, right? It's not knowledge, it's a preconceived notion, right? And that's all that they've known. That's how they respond. They respond with fear and they respond with anger. And what do they end up doing to the dude? If we're getting to the end of the cave, they, out of fear and they anger, they kill the dude. They're like, yeah, we don't like what you have to say. And they smash him with rocks and he's dead. And they go back to their living in their with their cave forms. So, but yeah.
And all that comes from that is stink.
Well, yeah.
So when we think about, so you said something else though just now, Joe, that, this is that's a classic painting. I've seen that before. I think in one of my art classes, which made me a veritable expert after one semester.
Boom.
Just saying. So something that you said, Joe, was it's their preconceived notions. Now, is their preconceived notion, like, when does that stop? When do we stop compartmentalizing, or when can we stop categorizing something as a preconceived notion and instead know that it is it, right? Like,
What is subjective? What is objective?
Well, if you were asking Plato, he'd give you a really long-winded answer, right? Because everything is just different levels of forms, right? Even the way that we experience the world today, it's form-driven,
mm-hmm.
right? So it's, the short answer is you may never get to the ultimate concept of reality because we're limited, right? And to get all science nerdy, we're limited, right? We can see how much of the electromagnetic spectrum, this much, right? Even though there's this much of it,
Mm-hmm.
For those that love, Ooh, somebody just made a flat earth comment and my brain started smoking. So we're going to leave that one there. And don't you dare put it on the screen. So, no, again, reading and rereading the allegory of the cave is interesting because the answer to your question, Robert, is right there. Plato specifically says none of these people are born in the cave. They're born out in the outside world. And at some point when they're very, very young, they're brought into the cave. And he says that for a reason, right? So they've had the experience, even if they were just babies, right? So they've experienced the real. Now I'm starting to sound like I'm in the Matrix. They've experienced the real, but they were forced into that cave, and that's where those.
You're going to put me back in, right? You're going to wipe my memory. You're going to put me back in, right?
Steak.
Ignorance.
I know
is
this steak
bliss.
isn't real.
Yes.
Right.
I'll go for fake steak all day long, and all day.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know how good the food is on the Nebuchadnezzar, but it can't be that good, right? What was it? They were just eating sloppy and oatmeal kind of
this
tastes
protein
like
oatmeal stuff. Yeah.
Look like grits at a Waffle House.
Yeah. So what causes somebody then to return to the cave?
Why would you go back?
Well, no, I want to know, right? If we're not born in the cave, how do we get in there? How do we avoid going into the cave in the first place?
Well,
that's why everyone's done it.
I don't think we have it. Oh,
that's the way it's always been done.
No one had a choice, right? If we're going to go back, if we're going to use the Matrix analogy, and I don't know if you guys mentioned it before, but the Matrix revolves around the allegory of the
bingo.
Cave. It's spot on.
Yep.
And which is awesome once you think about it. But none of those people, just like the people in the Matrix, had a choice. They were there
as infants, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. So you don't have a choice. You start off in the cave. Everybody starts off in the cave.
Now, one thing I think it's fascinating too is once you treat it as an allegory, right? And whether you want to argue it's describing Platonic forms or whether it's describing enlightenment, you start to see it apply in other areas as well, right? So one thing that I've seen like professionally, right, where I'm like a business process re-engineer as well, and I find efficiencies, right? And you can do everything to say, I have a ton of data that shows this is much more efficient than the way you're doing it. And they're like, we don't believe you. Like, well, wait, it's not a belief thing. Like, why don't you see this? This makes perfect sense that you should be doing it this way. And it gets met with resistance. Like, no kidding. We've had this conversation, with my coworkers saying it's like this allegory here where not only are they not embracing this change, they can't wrap their heads around it because they only know this one way. They've only been looking at the cave wall, and they got their whole career done by looking at this cave wall. That is a horse, and that my career depends on it. My paycheck depends on it. And if you show them a better way, it's inconceivable to them.
Well, this was a really interesting thing. We had a workshop. I don't know, it was many, many years ago at my current company, and they, of course, right, they put all of the black belts in a room, and they said, okay, we're going to do this exercise with everybody who isn't a black belt or isn't Lean Six Sigma. And listen, I'm not an LSS like guru or anything. I went through the trainings, I did the thing, I got my certs, so all that. But you're right, John. People don't believe it until you show them. And the classic example was a video we showed them, and they said, no way. And we put them in a production line.
Yes.
And basically, it was,
it doesn't.
Here are the letters. Here's 20 letters.
Yes.
20 envelopes. Here is one pen. And I want you to basically write all of your addresses, set them aside. I want you to fold all your envelopes, put them aside, right? Like they're doing these batchings.
Correct. Yeah.
Instead, we said, well, what if instead you did the envelope, you folded it up, you put it inside, you sealed it up, and you sent it on down.
One at a time.
One at a time if you did that.
Mm-hmm.
We cut the time by around 6 seconds.
It's amazing.
And they were like, how did we do that?
Oh, right. That's funny.
We were like, oh, now you see the light. Okay, so, but it's
because you have to in the allegory, you got to unlatch them. You got to turn their head around and show them the fire. And you have to blind them temporarily to go, oh, ouch. Like now I get it, and it's met with resistance. I do the same thing. I built a Lego assembly line kind of game, and I built delays and bottlenecks in there on purpose. And then when you change just one little thing, they have to see it. Like they have to feel it touch it, do it, for them to go, oh crap, like I've been thinking about this wrong my whole life. So it's so true, because we have an emotional connection to things, right? I think that's the other like unsaid part of this too, is intellectualism, abstraction, all these higher forms in this allegory. um it takes some thought, it takes some um getting out of how we feel into how we think. And that's the elevation of the platonic forms as well, as you get outside of the cave, right? But too often we're stuck, even when we're going back and forth debating on Facebook, right? We're stuck at this emotional level and we can't get out, which again, that's the point I kind of wanted to like round things out with, was how do we avoid getting stuck in our own caves? If we're not going from cave 1 to cave 2, as Eric Schultz said.
Isn't that all Facebook is just little caves?
We're just, echo chambers are caves for a reason, right?
Little caves. And then sometimes people will just leave their cave, not look at anything, run into someone else's cave and just start screaming and yelling.
Hey,
like they have Tourette syndrome. Yeah, absolutely. That's Facebook.
But that's the thing is, for me, just to kind of get right to the point, I'm not very good at it, but I try to look at content that has an opposing viewpoint to what I believe. I try to do it on a regular basis. I'm not great at it, but I try. And I'll even, if I can, try to find something as polar opposite, not like adjacent to my idea. I want to find something, let me hear, convince me that this craziest opposite idea is true. And let me, we've talked about this in the show too, let me try to steelman it, and let me see, can I understand your point of view so well that you would believe it if I said it, right? That it's something that anyone on that side would agree with. And so it's hard, because you are forcing yourself to unshackle, turn around, face the fire, and get a different viewpoint. It's going to hurt, it's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to hurt your eyes, but it's a really good exercise to do every now and then. You don't have to buy all in, but if you're not exposed, if you're not unshackled every once in a while, you're just going to start sticking to those shadows that you're comfortable with.
I mean, to that, the whole time you were talking, all I was thinking about was how successful, going back to, the end of the allegory of the cave, where they take Mr. Enlightened guy and they basically smash him with rocks until he's dead. How often do we in society, are we successful by other people trying to tell us what that thing is or show us what that right process is, as opposed to us, like you said, unlatching ourselves and then figuring it out on our own? Like, what's that success level worth? Because then you're not, one is all you and the other one is, well, somebody's telling me and I don't believe anything that John says because he's an idiot. So, and I move on. So
it's turtles all the way down.
Oh my God.
Nice.
It is rather interesting. I think the way to escape the cave is not only doing what you're proposing, John, which is to challenge your own viewpoints by looking for contrary information. In fact, when I get into a stupid Facebook argument, which I do often, I'm not above it. The first thing I do when I want to put together a well argumented point, right? I'm not trying to win. I'm just trying to get the other person to say, maybe.
What about that?
Is I basically say why whatever it is I believe isn't real or isn't true, right? And then usually what happens is I do that, and then all I get is a bunch of like before it's news articles, and I go, well, shoot, I guess I'm going to win this one. But it is so difficult, right? Like, it's one thing to take a position in combative sort of arguments online. It's another to challenge your own thinking, which I think we had a taste of probably in the last 10 years. And it's gaining more acceptance and traction to examine our own lives and look at, for me, I'll say for me, I'm going to use this caveat for me because I don't want anybody like yelling at TMR or whatever. You can yell at me, right? What are my intrinsic biases? What are my like
your priors, your biases? Those are all your shadows, right?
Yeah,
Those are all the things that you start with.
Right, spot on.
I grew up in an Italian American household. There was racist jokes and things told all the time, right? That, as I'm growing up, forms a bias in my brain. As you grow up and you expose yourself and you question why you think things, you unlearn, but acknowledge that you had that, right? And you need to be, and it's like an honesty thing with yourself too.
And
so
it's okay. It's okay to let go of that.
We are growing as people, right? We're doing the internal work, which is, escaping. The alt title for this episode could be Freemasonry is the escape from Plato's cave.
It should be. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, that's what, you've heard us talk about for years now. We're not trying to say we're better than any brothers. We're just trying to say that we're trying to apply the lessons and allegories of Freemasonry to make ourselves better, right? We take good men and make them better. How do we do that? We apply this so that we are a different person, not just after our third degree, but for the rest of our life. We are always continuously growing, searching for more light, having a different perspective, growing as a person, becoming a better person, becoming a better husband, father, brother, neighbor, right? Employee. And you do that through always going in and out of that cave, right? Just breaking those shackles, breaking those preconceived notions. And if you're not growing, you're dying.
I mean, I think that, yes, you're right. And let me start with that. So you don't.
Of course I am.
Not me. That's right. You're always right. I think when I liken the allegory of the cave to Freemasonry, I think at least I hope we're the type of people that will stand up as we're in that cave and break that shackle off of our neck and get up and walk out, whether we have to do it once or 100 times, right? Because there's always different understandings of the way that we think the world works, and every single person and every single Mason is at a different step in that process. So I think we're breaking out of that cave over and over and over again. But I think what differentiates those who seek a path and those that don't is that they're the ones that are willing to stand up and walk out of that cave, for better or for worse. So,
which is risky. Yeah. I mean, it's huge. I mean, that's not a small undertaking. I want to double down on that, because it is a risk when you try to join a society that's changing a perspective, when you're getting out of your comfort zone, when you have to ask to join Freemasonry, even, right? No one's recruiting you. Like, you have to say, hey, I'm going out on a limb here. I want to be a member. That is the beginning. That's the loosening of the shackle around your neck, is to say, wait a minute, I'm not comfortable where I am. I want to grow. And then, of course, there's the loosely attributed Mark Twain quote that I like to re-paraphrase for Masonry, right? You become a Mason twice, once when you're raised and once again when you know why. And there are some brothers that just don't get to that second time they're a Mason. They go through the degrees, they look at the ritual, and they see it as the exoteric. They see it as the shadows. Oh, that's a cute little play. That's cool.
It really is interesting that you bring this up. Recently, shameless plug, WCY last week, I read a paper by a former president of the Theosophical Society in America, and he talked about Freemasonry. And he talked about kind of these two divergent paths that exist within the craft. One being those that believe in Freemasonry as a spiritual science, a development, right? And the other who view it as, and he is by no means being derogatory or
No.
talking down to, but saying the other is a very fraternal, social, and benevolent society. And not to downplay, he even gives accolades
All
to the
good
amount of
things.
charity and things. However, he brings up the difference. And what I find interesting here too is, yeah, what you just said, we have a number of brothers who perhaps don't always um, want to loosen the shackle anymore. It's enough that they have acknowledged, oh man, there is a fire over there. I know I'm seeing some stuff on the wall, and I'm going to try to imagine what's causing it. But I'm a little, I like the party. I'm going to stay here. I
Yeah,
like the party. I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to leave just yet. Right.
that can happen.
It's like those memes that we all see. And I think many of us have probably experienced, right? It's like the spiritual awakening, what people think it's like, and then what it's really like. And some dude crying in a corner naked in the shower. Ugh, right. Yeah. That is not, like you said, no small undertaking.
No.
It brings to mind the image. You all seen the Chronicles of Riddick movies. I think it's pretty good sci-fi. But there's a scene where a dude decides he's just gonna like walk outside and get obliterated by the sun.
Oh yeah.
That, right? Or Captain Canada in Sunshine when he fixes the solar shield and gets like obliterated as he witnesses the sun. Like that's the kind of courage that this takes. In like without a doubt.
Yeah, and to your point, like there are people who are at the threshold and decide not to go through with it, right? Because it is leaving a comfort zone, and holy smokes, like that's one of the most hardest things is that first step is to get out of what's comfortable, what's familiar, what I've grown up with, right? To experience something new, to challenge my thoughts, my assumptions, my priors. People just may not be comfortable with just even that having their facts challenged.
And John, how many times, and I'm sure Joe too, Joe's been a Mason longer than you and I both. And I only can imagine, Joe, you've got to have some great insight here. I'm coming at you cold, so sorry.
Hit me.
But we have this idea of reconciliation, right? Like when we witness how something is, and then we learn something new, we have to reconcile somehow to stay active, to stay on the path when it is so damn easy to just say, to hell with it. I'm stepping off. I'm gonna schedule a Monday night football thing and just forget all about this and walk away because reconciliation is daunting, it's uncomfortable, it's challenging, and it's not convenient at all.
So that's really apropos because there was a point in my Masonic career, and I've spoken about it, where I did say, screw it all. I was like, I got better things to do. Bye. I ain't got time for this anymore. And I went back into the cave. And I said, the cave is cool. It's always cool. Doesn't burn my eyes. And it's a happy place. So do I know there's more? Yeah. But exactly to your point, I'm comfy and cozy, and this is where I need to be. But obviously I didn't stay there very long. And again, I think that we make that conscious choice to live outside of the cave, and that's why we're all stressed out all the time. That's why we drink too much coffee, and that's why they have very happy and wonderful medications out there for people that struggle knowing that there's more. And I think that's the difference between a seeker and someone who just lives and consumes and exists in the world, right? We know that there's something more, and I guess you could say it makes us sad that we can't see it or know it or touch it or feel it, right? But we know it's there, and we try our damnedest to walk that path in search of it, whatever it may be for each particular person, So it's kind of melancholy, right? But I think it's necessary for some, not for all. If it was for all, then the world would be a much cooler place.
Love it. Yeah, that's you nailed it pretty well, and that's probably a good place to transition off. So, uh, question of the week as it relates to this is, what's been your personal application of the allegory of the cave? Right? How have you seen it applied it yourself? How have you experienced it, and internalized it? So I'll give you a second to think about that, and making sure that Robert doesn't steal Joe's idea. I'm going to let Joe go first.
I don't think he will. Yeah, so I think that for me, one of my big defining cave moments was as I struggled through faith and belief over the course of about a decade. I'd say into my, from my early 20s into my early 30s. The allegory of the cave for me was wrestling with what I understood faith and belief to be. And I'd say it was for a good few years. I struggled with it. I didn't understand or agree with what other people told me. And I thought that there had to be a different way or a better way. But basically, a long way to say that it took me 10 years to figure out that both faith and belief are a very personal thing, and that's okay. And it doesn't have to fit inside the little constructs that have been placed before us. And once I realized that that's okay and it's an okay way to live, then I didn't feel constricted and I didn't feel tortured and I didn't feel pain by it anymore. I could live my life through the glasses that I thought were placed in front of me. And I can't say it's made life easier, but I'm definitely a lot more at peace than I was. I don't struggle with things the way I used to. My receding hairline aside, I don't struggle with those thoughts and those things the way that I used to. Yeah, it was bad, and I'm here in my 40s now, and I could tell you in my 20s, it was rough. Even though I was younger and skinnier and faster and more dashing, and I had all that awesome hair that you see on Facebook. No, it was rough, and I would not want to go through that again. So, for that, I'm definitely not going back in the cave. But yeah, that's my cave story.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. All right, over to Robert. What's your personal cave story?
It's probably a cooler story to talk about something like why I didn't want to go to craft beer and instead just wanted to continue to drink Pabst Blue Ribbon. I'm just kidding. I hate Pabst Blue Ribbon. I've never liked it, and if you like it, you're a hipster, and don't just unfriend me on Facebook right now. I think it touches, I think, on what Joe was talking about, the idea of faith and religion and sort of spirituality as it is. For me, I had a reconciliation problem, which is I grew up Roman Catholic. Then I went through a Lutheran academy, and then having this large basis in I don't know what you want to call it, like it's religious training, but at the level that is supposed to be for people my age, right? And so after a spell, I found that I just like my mom was a Democrat. And so I was a young Republican, right? I had this teenage angst. And I was like, basically, I didn't really know what an atheist was, but I was like, God's not real, right? That's just some made up stuff for you to feel better about the afterlife and to get you through life without freaking out, right? You got to have hope in something. Otherwise, what's the meaning of it all? And then I got into, I read some philosophy books. One was an essay book, a book of essays called Why Nothing Can Travel Faster Than Light, and a bunch of other essays or something. And in this book, it proposed something very interesting that is actually a wonderful TikTok video that Neil deGrasse Tyson recently had posted, which I thought was interesting because He's bringing up this thing that was inside of a book that I read, in 1997. And he basically says that the entire number of people that have ever existed is about 100 billion. And the possible number of gene combinations to make a human being is so much bigger than this, that the fact that any of us exist right now is in a huge contrast to the amount of people who will never exist.
I saw that one. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this speaks to, well, I don't care how you want to think about it, but it is miraculous, right? The probability is there. And so my issue was that I then went into a bit of agnosticism. And then I read too much Thomas Paine and became a deist. And math is like this language for me, right? And it was this sort of beckoning that called to me from outside the cave. This was a language of sorts. My grandpa always said, math is just a language that we understand things in. And it really started clicking with me. And I started to have this problem about the law of probabilities. And this is this is reconciling something that I think most people won't identify with. This is very strange. It's very me. It's very like niche, but I couldn't wrap myself around the idea of mathematically a God or a creator, us, and let's just call extrasolar biological entities, right? Like mathematically, they're supposed to be there.
Aliens.
Yeah. Aliens. Yeah.
Drake's equation.
Right. So the Drake equation, 50,000 possible in our own galaxy, right? But it's actually much larger than that when you consider an equation that I wrote. But anyway, so this was my Plato's cave. This was like, I can't do it. I don't even want to think about it. This was like all the light news, the math, and the things I could think about outside. And then I had to conquer that in order to knock at the door of my lodge, which I think about every day. Every damn day I think, if I hadn't have taken up the challenge of whiteboarding and journaling and thinking and challenging myself, like essentially to find God, right? My wife's family, they're all, kind of in the evangelical Christian area. And they think I'm weird because I say I don't have any faith, because I know, right? And I don't mean that to be condescending or like sound like an a-hole or anything. It's just a fact for me. And so once I knew, then I could earnestly knock at the lodge door. And so then the light of Masonry assisted me in taking off from there. And, the rest is meeting you guys, and you guys always dragging me out of the damn cave.
For some PBR.
Man, I'm going to slap you.
Let's do it. Green beans and PBR.
Oh, my God.
Die in a fire.
I love it. Love it. You know what I love about it? I don't have a vice like you guys. So let's figure this out. So for me, it's hard to follow Robert Sack there. But one thing that I take personally is that I've always been the one to challenge the way it's always been done. I've always through work, I like follow along, but then always ask, why is it done this way, or why can't we do it this other way? And there's a lot of roadblocks that you'll get when you face, when you start to go down that path, right? You'll have other people in the cave with you going, like, shut up and color, just face the wall. You're not supposed to be asking these questions. And I think it's a moral duty to just continually just loosen that shackle just a little bit, just to question, why do we still have these on, until you get to the point where you break free, right? And that's been done with my faith. It's been done with my profession. It's been done with like changing jobs. Like I changed almost careers during the pandemic, and that was a huge leap of faith, where I said, let me just try something different. in order to see if I can adapt and to see if this is something else, right? So Scott says here, I think the progressive line almost equates to a Plato's cave type transition as a brother learns how the organization actually works versus what it was when they joined. Right?
I put it up because it spoke to me when you were talking about how you have always kind of challenged the way it is, right?
I have to chime in. That is so perfect, because once you think you got it, then you get back down to the cave and all the grumpy past masters, they beat you with rocks until you're dead.
Throw another chain on, buddy. Let's get back in line.
Bye.
We've warmed your seat up. Come on in. Just put these little shackles on, buddy. That's funny. That's funny. That hurts. It's because it's so true. Oh man, so this has been a great episode to explore our personal journeys, to explore the allegory itself, how it can be interpreted, how we've seen it come to light across our respective Masonic journeys as well. So again, I want to thank all the brothers for chiming in. I want to thank all of you for watching, and most importantly, I want to thank all of you all for tuning in every week. So see you next week, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.